Julian, what do we know about the ability of ships currently to traverse through the Red Sea, and just how dramatic of an escalation and an issue is it for these oil markets?
Well, I think it's quite clear a significant escalation. This is the first attack by Houthis on shipping in the southern Red Sea for several months now. They clearly warned that they were going to do this, and they have followed through. On the other hand, we have seen two Chinese-owned tankers full of Saudi crude that are at this very moment passing through the strait. They appear to have crossed the narrowest point, and they're now entering the Gulf of Aden on their way out the Arabian Sea. Now, that doesn't yet put them out of the danger zone, but it does seem that at least some ships are being allowed through, and we're yet to fully understand how selective the Houthis are being in terms of what they target. But this Red Sea route had emerged as a vital workaround to the effective near total closure of Hormuz. Saudi Arabia had redirected somewhere in the region of 4 million barrels a day of oil exports from the Persian Gulf to the Red Sea. Those are now substantially at risk. And what really matters is less, how many tankers are attacked, but what the impact is on the owners and the crews of ships that would normally pass through that waterway, and whether they are willing to still take that risk. And that is the only real measure of whether the waterway is open or closed, no matter what politicians on either side say.
So, Julian, if both the Strait of Hormuz and the Red Sea get disrupted, how high could oil prices realistically go?
Well, I mean, we've seen forecasts and analysis from some of the big banks talking about oil at 120 and sticking up around that sort of a level. We've already seen Brent break through $100 a barrel today. So, what I think is clear is that the market is very concerned about these choke points. It's very concerned about the amount of oil that may or may not flow through both Hormuz and the Bab el-Mandab at the southern end of the Red Sea, and that is going to keep pressure on prices for the time being.
I just wonder, Julian, and again, I saw that note from Goldman about $120 in oil prices as a possibility. We did have that earlier in the year when this conflict first erupted, yet we did see the market pull back on demand. Is there any idea now that we understand maybe demand for oil is more elastic than we originally thought, and this market can cope with less barrels of oil on the market?
Well, certainly a sort of pullback in demand was part of the way that the market coped with the initial disruption that began in March. And we've certainly seen a reduction in consumption, most notably in China. But I think the other thing that we have to remember is there has been very significant drawdown of stockpiles to also help contribute. Those stockpiles, yes, there is still oil in both commercial and strategic storage, but there's a lot less than there was at the end of February. So, unless you start replenishing those stockpiles, you can't keep drawing them down forever. And I think the other the other issue that is going to contribute to upward pressure on prices is what's happening in the Black Sea. We've seen attacks on tankers waiting to load at the CPC pipeline. That's about 1.5 million barrels a day of oil, most of which comes from Kazakhstan, and an awful lot of it is produced by American companies. But that pipeline has, for the moment at least, halted. So on top of Hormuz and the Red Sea, we've got these issues in the Black Sea as well, which are all adding to this pressure.
When you zoom out, Julian, do you think we're entering an era where geopolitical risk is permanently reshaping global oil prices and the shipping routes in the world?
I think what has happened in the last 4 or 5 months has been a clear illustration of just how much we depend on these very narrow waterways and how easy it is for the states on the shores of those waterways to severely limit traffic through them should they want to. So that clearly raises, I think, everybody's understanding of the geopolitical threats. Will things calm down again? I'm sure in time they will, but when that time will come, I think is a much more open question at the moment.